There we go.
Good day, everyone. Firstly, thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me to be part of this panel and engaging in the discussion on the legacies of the British Empire. As James said, my name is Arti Ramsaroop, and I am presently a postgraduate history student at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. My presentation today is entitled Legacies of the British Empire, British Colonization in Trinidad and Tobago, 1797 onwards. The term legacies or colonial legacies implies that influences and outcomes of colonialism are in fact over, yet contemporary economic, political, and social structures across regions continue to be shaped by their distinctive experiences from the period of colonialism. This presentation will focus on social legacies of British colonization on Trinidad. I will begin with a brief historical timeline of the colonization of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad's colonial history began in 1498 when the Spanish landed on the island. At this time, Trinidad possessed a budding indigenous population. However, this did not deter the Spanish invaders. The island became a colony of Spain in 1498, but not until 1592 was a town formally established. Minimal Spanish settlement followed, and Trinidad remained an isolated, barely developed outpost of the vast Spanish-American Empire. In 1783, as part of the cedula, France settled Trinidad. By 1797, when the British entered the island, Trinidad had the markings of a sugar and slavery economy and society, with a mainly French elite and an important free colored class of landowners. In 1802, Britain's possession of the island was confirmed, and Trinidad remained a British colony until its independence in 1962. Tobago was annexed to Trinidad in two stages between 1889 and 1898. Following the British takeover of Trinidad, the plantation system earlier developed by the French expanded, and a plantation economy rooted in the institution of chattel slavery dominated. The quantity of enslaved Africans increased significantly in the early 1800s, with the enslaved population comprising approximately 67% of total population in 1815. In 1838, following emancipation, Trinidad's planters agitated for indentured workers from Asia, following the precedent of the set by Mauritius and British Guyana. In the years 1845 to 1917, approximately 147,000 Indian indentured laborers arrived in Trinidad. Most stayed on the island when their contracts expired, and their descendants constitute a substantial portion of the current population. Apart from Indian indentured laborers, smaller numbers of migrants from other parts of the world also entered Trinidad. As such, by the 20th century, Trinidad had an extremely diverse population in terms of ethnicity, places of origin, religion, and culture. Economically, throughout the 19th century, sugar remained the backbone of the colonial economy, with cocoa expanding rapidly and dominating the export arena by 1900. However, cocoa declined substantially in the 1920s to 1940s and never recovered. Following 1930, oil found in the southern half of Trinidad became the colony's most important source of revenue by the 1930s. The demands of World War II and the development of marine production in the 1950s only increased the domination of oil in the island's modern economy. Trinidad and Tobago developed a rich cultural life from early colonial times, enhanced by the striking diversity of the population. Gordon Lewis posited that the English left its special mark upon its colonial subjects, creating a local culture almost utterly derivative of the most suburban of English values, even although geographically remote from the ancestral sources. He continued that for a whole century, that is to say, from new free labor tropical society established by emancipation, developed along lines set by Victorian Christian bourgeois modes of thought. It was almost completely a unilateral relationship, since as minor colonies, the West Indies local capitals stood little chance of influencing the metropolitan culture or politics. sadly, this is perpetuated to this day. The Caribbean economist Jitendra Kandon postulated that institutions and the historical conditions that influenced their formations are now widely considered important to understanding differences in economic development across countries. He continued that there are alternative views to the channels through which colonial experience influenced present-day development outcomes. Some economists have argued in favor of a colonizer effect, whereby British colonies benefited from legal systems that were favorable for economic performance compared to other colonial powers. The British had a profound influence on the region's politics, economy, and institutions. The legacy of British colonization persists in Trinidad and Tobago through its political system of governance, language, education system, transportation, and trade linkages, ethnic composition, as well as its dominant economic models. In other words, the legacy of British colonization is presently visible in every facet of Trinidad and Tobago. While some may argue that there have been advantages forged from Trinidad and Tobago's colonial past, the negatives are more prominent. The fact is illuminated through an analysis of the country's present social, economic, and political systems, as well as the modern cry for decolonization and repatriatory justice for the Caribbean region. So going into the social legacies of British colonialism. So societal structure and social hierarchy. The legacy of British colonization of Trinidad is evidenced in the present-day structure of its society possessed visible remnants of colonial societal structures. Lewis stated that emancipation was accompanied by deep changes in the structure of society. For 1834, without doubt, marked the beginning of a new societal phase in which the old group of planter, merchant, monopolist, and white colonial officials were gradually superseded both in economic power and societal status by the new groups of Creole cultivator, peasant farmer, and native politician. This was accompanied by the rise of the class of free coloreds. Lewis continued that practically every traveler's report on Victorian West Indian life noted the existence of a flourishing colored society, whose members were at once the most fully creolized group of the colonies in their general lifestyle and the most Anglophile in their political and social attitudes. Simply put, colonial Trinidad, like other British colonies, was stratified based on color and education and the attainment of wealth that were main vehicles of social mobility. This system is still ever present in Trinidad and Tobago. The complexion of one's skin and their financial status often determines one's place in society. The divisions in Trinbagonian society reflected the economic separatism of its polyglot character. Their divisions were orchestrated by the planter class as a strategy to divide and conquer. Planters often pitted one cultural polity against another. Thus, separatism bled into the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. As the parties are divided, and these are the two main political parties in Trinidad and Tobago, are divided into the two main ethnic communities. And on the night of general elections, many racist comments can be seen on social media from both sides. Moving on to education and language. According to Lewis, in colonial Trinidad and Tobago, the education system followed the class bias of the British metropolitan model, and the contemporary West Indian educational enterprise still inherits the legacy. For example, in 1960, more than 50% of the total working population in Trinidad and Tobago possessed no higher than a primary school education. Moreover, the curriculum itself reeks of Trinidad and Tobago's colonial past, so much so that there has been calls for the decolonization of the curriculum. Decolonization is the process of undoing colonizing practices. Within the educational context, this means confronting and challenging the colonizing practices that have influenced education in the past and which are still present today. Nowadays, colonialism is more subtle and is often perpetuated through curriculum, power relations, and institutional structures. Schools need to consider whose knowledge and ways of knowing are given priority. Decolonized education is rooted in connections to place, Place-based education empowers students to helps restore cultural knowledge. Part of the process of decolonizing education is re-establishing links with the community. Education should not occur in a vacuum, and these links are essential for contextualizing knowledge, deepening understanding, encouraging community involvement, and reconnecting students with a vital support system. It is important moving forward to reflect on the goal of education. This reflection often uncovers motives for mandated education deeply rooted in colonialist policy. In terms of language, the official language of the former British colonies is English. At the expense of local dialects, English is often viewed as the yardstick against which all other languages are measured, as well as one's intellectual capabilities. Moving on to place names and monuments. David Trotman articulated that the names inscribed as markers of European possession of Caribbean landscapes stand as irrefutable testimony of its colonial past and are seemingly resistant to the process of symbolic decolonization. European intruders signified their seizure of the New World by various acts or rituals, or what Patricia Seed calls ceremonies of possession, which included naming. As such, Trinidad is lettered with the names of its colonial past. For example, the capital is called Port of Spain. Places carry French names such as La Perouse, Laventille, and Blanchisseuse. Similarly, British names are ever present in Trinidad and Tobago's towns, buildings, and streets. These names were used in the colonial period to remind the inhabitants of their membership to the larger imperial family of their expanding British Empire. Unfortunately, they continue to remind Trinbagonians of this horrid past. McIntyre stated that we cannot change the objective facts of history, but we can re-examine these facts to better guide our perspective. Decolonization is the process of revisiting the objective facts and applying revisited perspectives to improve policies. Sir Hilary Beckles echoed this view as he articulated his position on the Milner case issue at the UWI St. Augustine. He stated it is not a question of removing history. You cannot remove history, but you can determine who you will glorify in history. As such, there has been many initiatives to remove colonial statues, monuments, and names from Trinidad and Tobago's landscape. The most recent being the renaming of Milner Hall at UWI to Freedom Hall and the Crossroads Freedom Project initiative to remove Columbus statues from Trinidad. Trotman rightly stated that among the options available to signify post-colonial possession would be an active public history intervention by the use of state funds for the erection of new statues, programs to rename or name public streets, roads, highways, and buildings. Trinidad has somewhat begun this, but more has to be done. Heather Cato stated, there have been some new statues and memorials erected since the late 20th century. Many of them in Trinidad and Tobago have been cultural icons, like Calypsonians, the Lord Kitchener, Mighty Sparrow, Calypso Rose, chutney artists such as Sundar Popo, and sporting heroes such as Brian Lara and Hasty Crawford. This, however, has not led to the removal of the ones erected during colonization. So while Trinidad and Tobago are highlighting some of their local heroes, the colonial statues are still not being removed. Trinidad and Tobago also made a symbolic change in 1984 when the discretion was made to commemorate Emancipation Day instead of Discovery Day. Furthermore, new narratives with revisionist perspectives have been written by academics, but they still have not really been heard and internalized by the average person. There have also been changes in the curricula at the primary, secondary school, and tertiary levels. However, like I said, much more has to be done. Thank you.